swing this ballot, we now need to get on with the job of delivering Brexit for the British people and building a better future for this country. A Brexit that delivers on the vote that people gave, that brings back control of our money, borders and our laws, that protects jobs, security and the union, that brings the country back together rather than entrenching division. That must start here in Westminster, with politicians on all sides coming together and acting in the national interest. So here is our renewed mission: delivering the Brexit that people voted for, bringing the country back together and building a country that truly works for everyone.
Resilient but not inscrutable. This is not the end of this argument or a triumph over hearts and minds.
Of course I accept this result, but the Prime Minister must realise that under all constitutional norms she ought to go and see the Queen urgently and resign.
There are lessons for her, lessons for the party. This has hardly been an ideal day for the Conservative Party, but the party has voted very comfortably that it wants her to stay, wants her to take us through Brexit.
The Prime Minister might have won. The divisions and bitterness are right out there. Listen to how her Chancellor talked about some of his colleagues.
And I think what this vote today will do is flush out the extremists who are trying to advance a particular agenda.
But a win is not the same as a true victory. Survival, not the same as succeeding. Another Tory Prime Minister's leadership fractured, if not broken, by a decades-old dispute of the party's own. Laura Kunsberg, BBC News, Westminster.
Well, as we've been reporting, EU leaders have already said that they have no intention of changing their agreement with the UK. But earlier, Brussels did perhaps offer some kind of movement, and that is in the form of a draft document which leaders will sign after their summit with Theresa May on Thursday morning. Adam Fleming can talk us through that.
Now, this draft is floating around and it's got a few very, very interesting things in it. And what those things are is that it amounts to these are the assurances the EU is planning to give Theresa May so that she can take it back to the House of Commons and try and persuade MPs that the withdrawal agreement isn't that bad after all. It's all about the Northern Irish backstop. Remember that backup plan, the insurance policy for avoiding a hard border between Northern Ireland and Ireland, which would see the UK, the whole of the UK, staying in a sort of customs union with the EU, and lots of EU rules and regulations still applying to Northern Ireland. Now, one of the Brexiteers' big fears, and many other MPs in Parliament's big fears, is that that backstop is actually going to be forever and the UK will never be able to escape from it. It will be the end state. Now, all along, the EU has said, no, that's not the case, it's temporary. We don't like it very much either. We want to avoid it at all costs. It's only a backup plan, a fallback if it's needed. So they've been going to great lengths to try and show just how temporary they want it to be. So this document that's floating around tonight, to be signed up by EU leaders, contains a commitment from the EU that they will continue to negotiate a future trade agreement with the UK, even if the backstop comes into place at the end of the post-Brexit transition period. So even if the backstop is in place, the UK and the EU will continue to negotiate a future trade deal that could get rid of it, swipe it away so you don't need it anymore. That is to prove that the EU is serious when it means the backstop is going to be temporary and it's not going to be forever.
Adam Fleming there reporting from Brussels. Well, of course, attention now will focus on Theresa May, who has survived to fight another day here in Westminster. She will head off to Brussels first thing on Thursday morning to try and sit down at the negotiating table once again and to get the EU leaders on her side, to get her Brexit deal through, to make that March deadline. I have to say that the people we've been speaking to here in Westminster today are not very optimistic for her plans to stay intact because, as Adam was just saying there, that crucial issue regarding Northern Ireland and that backstop plan with the Republic of Ireland as well. But of course, it will be interesting to see what she comes away with from this summit when she does meet with EU leaders here today. But, you know, it has been an incredible day of intense drama here in Westminster. And Theresa May, like I said, is fighting another day, but she does have a bitterly divided party. She may have won that confidence vote, but 37% of her own party voted against her. So still, the days ahead are going to be trying. And of course, the drama, I'm sure, is set to continue here. Stay with us, much more coming up from me a little later in the programme from Westminster. But Rico, back to you in Singapore.
Critical week indeed, Babita, for Theresa May. Babita at Westminster. Let's now take a look at some of the day's other news. A judge in New York has sentenced Donald Trump's former lawyer and self-described fixer to 3 years in jail. Michael Cohen pleaded guilty to campaign finance charges in August. Those were related to hush money payments to women who said they had affairs with the president, which he denies. Mr. Cohen also admitted to lying to Congress about a proposed Trump Tower project in Russia. Neda Tawfik was in court.
Michael Cohen hung his head and shook it in disbelief when the sentence was read. He was hoping for no jail time, but the judge ultimately imposed 3 years in prison. Substantial, but still on the lower end of sentencing guidelines. The judge said that Michael Cohen had lost his moral compass and should have known better as a lawyer. And he said that no future cooperation could be taken into consideration in sentencing. Now, Michael Cohen was President Trump's longtime fixer, his pit bull lawyer who protected his interests for more than a decade. But in court, he had tough words for the president. He said that he had been living in a state of personal and mental incarceration ever since working for Mr. Trump. And he said that he had a weakness, a blind loyalty to the president. Now, Michael Cohen ended his statement in court by apologizing to the American people, saying that they deserved better than being lied to. Now, Michael Cohen is the first of Mr. Trump's inner circle to be sentenced to prison. He will be able to voluntarily surrender himself on March 6th, so he hasn't been sent directly to prison yet. But it's no wonder that the president has distanced himself from Michael Cohen. These crimes have implicated the president directly, and it's still uncertain what possible consequences could come of this. Justice Department guidelines say that a sitting president cannot be indicted, but there's nothing stopping prosecutors in the future, when Mr. Trump is out of office, from bringing a case forward if they feel it's warranted.
And it was Neda Tawfik in court. Also making news today, the European Parliament has ratified the EU's trade deal with Japan, the largest it has ever struck. It's been called the Cars for Cheese deal, with drastically cut tariffs on both sides. The European Commission estimates that EU exporters will save more than $1 billion a year on levies. 7 mass graves have been discovered in a former Islamic State group stronghold, Syrian state media says. They contain hundreds of unidentified bodies that seem to have been tortured. A Syrian Red Crescent official told reporters there were several women among the dead, and said some of those killed were blindfolded and handcuffed. 2 cardinals facing allegations linked to sexual abuse have been removed from Pope Francis's inner circle. The Vatican said Australia's George Pell and Chile's Francisco Javier Errázuriz will no longer sit on the Council of Cardinals set up by the Pope as an international advice body. Both cardinals deny allegations against them. The Afghanistan Football Federation has vigorously denied claims that some officials have sexually and physically abused players on the national women's team. World Football's governing body, FIFA, has suspended the AFF president, Keramuddin Keram, for 90 days pending an investigation. The ban can be extended depending on the outcome of the probe. And there was an unusual interruption in Colombia's Senate when protesters threw a bag containing rats and mice on the floor of the chamber. Take a look at those mice. A total of 4 rodents were involved, but only this one escaped. Well, the demonstrators are thought to have been making a point about graft and corruption. You're watching Newsday on the BBC, live from Westminster and Singapore. Still to come on the program, we'll have the latest on the search for the man suspected of killing 2 people at a Christmas market in France as the hunt spreads across Europe.
John Lennon was shot at the entrance to the Dakota building in the center of New York. There's been a crowd here standing in more or less silent vigil, and the flowers have been piling up.
The 14th ceasefire of this war ended at the walls of the old city of Dubrovnik. This morning, witnesses said shells were landing every 20 seconds.
People are celebrating the passing of a man they hold responsible for hundreds of deaths and oppression. Elsewhere, people have been gathering to mourn his passing.
Imelda Marcos, the widow of the former president of the Philippines, has gone on trial in Manila. She's facing 7 charges of tax evasion. She pleaded not guilty.
The Prince and Princess of Wales are to separate. A statement from Buckingham Palace said the decision had been reached amicably.
Welcome back, everyone. Glad you're staying with us. You're watching Newsday on the BBC. I'm Rico Hizon in Singapore.
Yes, thanks for joining us. I'm Babita Sharma, live here in Westminster. A reminder of our headlines this hour. Theresa May has survived a vote of no confidence in her leadership and says she's determined to see through the Brexit process.
Donald Trump's former lawyer, Michael Cohen, has been jailed for 3 years. He told the court in New York that he blamed his crimes on his former boss. All right, let's now take a look at some of the front pages from around the world. And we start off with the Straits Times publication of Singapore. And it is leading on Malaysia's moves to diffuse tensions with the city-state. And this comes after Malaysia withdrew 2 of its vessels that had been in the Republic's territorial waters. Let's shift now our attention to the international edition of the New York Times publication. And it leads on this very heartbreaking image of family members grieving over the graves of their loved ones who were killed in El Salvador by MS-13 gang members. And finally, you have the international edition of the Japan Times newspaper. And it has on its front page visa tests to be held overseas. The Foreign Ministry plans to hold Japanese language tests in at least 7 countries for a new type of work visa. And those are the papers. Now back to Babita at Westminster.
Rico, yes, thank you very much. A reminder then that Theresa May has survived a vote of no confidence, 200 against 117 that voted against her. She has survived that leadership, but it's fair to say that since she's come into office here in the House of Commons, she hasn't had an easy ride, of course, residing over that Brexit process, which is still very much ongoing, with a deal yet to be done with the EU. So, of course, as she heads to Brussels on Thursday morning, everybody is going to be asking what happens next. Our Deputy Political Editor, John Pienaar, has more.
They've been demonstrating here for months, rain or shine, for or against Brexit. Obsessed? Maybe, but they're also right to feel Brexit's the biggest issue facing Britain in decades. Bigger than tonight's decision to keep on and not sack Mrs May. It's still her job to try somehow to break the Brexit deadlock, and tonight's vote was never going to make that easier. Theresa May is still facing a deeply divided House of Commons party and cabinet, still struggling to win over Brexiteers who fear that the Brexit plan could leave the UK trapped inside European Union rules indefinitely. Some of them sit in cabinet. 2 have walked out since this was filmed. More of them are potential leadership candidates. And today, one Brexiteer warned a no-deal Brexit was still possible. And Mrs May, or presumably another leader, had to get more concessions out of Brussels or else.
It's very difficult to support the deal if we don't get changes to the backstop. I don't think it will get through. I'm not even sure that the Cabinet will agree for it to be put to the House of Commons.
Among the Cabinet's former Remainers, a softer Brexit with closer EU links than Mrs May's, though they're not saying that. They are saying they'd fight against leaving without a deal, and the Commons wouldn't wear it. You've been clear in your view that no deal, a no-deal Brexit is not a runner.
I have been clear that the House of Commons will stop no deal. The fact that I think it'll stop no deal doesn't mean we shouldn't continue preparations just in case. Some people have pointed out it could nevertheless happen. But I think no deal would be such a bad outcome for the country that I believe the House of Commons will assert itself and stop it.
So far, though, there's no sign of European leaders agreeing at tomorrow's EU summit that Britain EU rules in its own time on its own terms. In Berlin today, the German leader spoke plainly.
We have no
intention of changing the exit agreement, Angela Merkel said. Today, Mrs May warned any leader would be short of time. The Brexit timetable is tight after tomorrow's summit. In the new year, before January 21st, the delayed meaningful vote in the Commons is due. If the government's defeated, it must report back on its plans for the next steps within 21 days. But any deal must also be approved by the European Parliament before it takes effect. Then, at 11 p.m. on March the 29th, the UK is due to leave the EU. But the Prime Minister and her deal are still facing defeat by MPs. No one can yet rule out a Brexit tied closely to the EU or a fresh referendum. And however long Theresa May has left in office, the biggest question of all, what's Britain's future, still hangs in the air. John Pinar, BBC News.
Hundreds of police authorities are still hunting the gunman who escaped after a shootout at a Christmas market in France. Well, 2 people were killed and 13 others were injured in the attack in Strasbourg. There are fears the gunman may have crossed the border into Germany, where the security forces are also on alert. Investigators say it was an act of terror. Damien Grammaticus has the details from Strasbourg.
This is a city on alert. Hundreds of police and soldiers on a manhunt for a killer. But where did he go? Even the nearby border watched to stop him slipping away. Sharif Chekat, the suspected gunman, police now appealing for help finding him. He'd opened fire near the Christmas markets. This is the old heart of Strasbourg. People barricaded themselves inside. Among his victims, a tourist from Thailand, here on holiday with his wife. Sharif Chekat, 29 years old, has been in prison, has 27 convictions for crimes like robbery, and was already on France's terror watch list.
40 minutes, ça a duré.
The shooting went on for 30 or 40 minutes, Robin says. He filmed police scrambling for cover and says he knew the gunman.
Ouais, il était enfermé ici.
Yes, he was in prison here and in Germany too, he says. Outside the shop where he took cover, Ali told us he saw Chekat go past shooting and recognised him as they'd been in prison together.
Ça courait, les policiers, tout.
I saw people running, he says. Police running too. Everyone was saying it's gunshots. So now Strasbourg's famous Christmas market has been shuttered. All business stopped.
The Christmas market is one of the big attractions that draws visitors to Strasbourg. We don't know when this one will reopen. France has been put on the highest level of alert. And the government says that security will now be stepped up at Christmas markets across the country. Damien Grammaticus, BBC News, Strasbourg.
More now from Westminster, and of course Theresa May surviving that no confidence vote earlier today. I spoke to James Brokenshire, who is a community secretary in Theresa May's government, and he is a supporter of the Prime Minister, and he also voted Remain in the EU referendum. He gave me his reaction to today's vote.
I think tonight has allowed the Prime Minister now to move forward with that vote of confidence behind her, so that she's able to go to our European partners to seek the further assurances and clarifications, so that we're able to get that deal through Parliament behind us, to get the vote that we need, and therefore to deliver on this Brexit deal for the country, and allow us then to focus on those other priorities of schools, of hospitals, of homes and communities, which is what my brief is and what people want to see us to deliver on.
We can't quite talk about that just yet, though, of course, because everybody's taking stock of what's happened here in the last few hours. And let's have that conversation, because she didn't get a resounding vote of no confidence. It's still a divided party. So how significant do you believe it is that 117 MPs voted against her?
There's been a clear showing of support for the Prime Minister tonight, but yes, there have been, a significant number of people who have not voted for the Prime Minister, and we know that we need to redouble our efforts in working with colleagues, as the Prime Minister has underlined again tonight, on that need to listen, to act and to respond to a number of these concerns over, for example, the insurance policy on the open border between Northern Ireland and Ireland, which obviously has raised a number of issues of concern, and how we need to deal with that, respond to that, as well as working with our colleagues in the DUP on that too.
I want to ask you, though, you were privy to the conversations that were being had before the vote was cast from the Prime Minister herself, trying to continue to get the support that she needed here so desperately this evening. There was concessions that she made, saying that she will not stand in the 2022 general election. How much has that now served, do you think, to weaken her position going forward?
The Prime Minister has always said that she would serve for as long as the party wanted her to serve, and that was something that she's reaffirmed tonight, how she wanted to deliver through the next general election, how I think she in some ways wanted to respond to the mistakes that she felt that she made in the last general election.
It was a bit of a deal, wasn't it? Vote for me tonight and I won't be here tomorrow.
But it comes down to that sense of service that underpins I suppose the Prime Minister's credo: public service, service to party, and how she will only continue for that time where the party wants her to continue to serve. So I think she underlined that message, reaffirmed that message that she actually gave 12 months ago too, and how she wants to deliver on Brexit. She wants to deliver for our country on those issues, in a country that works for everyone, as she said in Downing Street again tonight, and how I think the vote now allows her to do that, allows her to move forward with the assurances that are required from our European partners, but also on that domestic agenda too, but clearly continuing to serve for as long as the party wants her to serve.
How do you feel about the Conservative Party?
And you've been watching Newsday. I'm Rico Hizon in Singapore.
Yes, thanks for joining us. I'm Babita Sharma here at Westminster, and a reminder of our main news again this hour. Theresa May has survived a vote of no confidence here on Wednesday evening. 200 MPs.
Do stay with the BBC News. Coming up, Hard Talk.
Welcome to Hard Talk. I'm Stephen Sackur. It took former cricketer Imran Khan 2 decades of hard political slog to win power in Pakistan. It has taken his critics just months to decide he's out of his depth. They point to the country's crippled economy, propped up by emergency loans, despite Imran's promise to end the begging bowl culture. Well, my guest today is Pakistan's Finance Minister, Asad Umar. Is the PTI government strong enough to put Pakistan on a new course? Asad Umar in Islamabad, welcome to Hard Talk.
Thank you.
You are one of the key ministers in Imran Khan's government. Why do you think the hope and excitement generated by Imran's election victory has worn off so very quickly?
Actually, it hasn't. If you look at the Pakistani media and listen to the political talk shows and maybe hear some of the discussions going on in the parliament, you might be led into believing what you just said. But in reality, you know, when the first 100 days of the government ended, there was a lot of focus, a number of surveys got carried out. And if you look at the surveys, a very clear majority of Pakistani thinks the country is moving in the right direction. It is moving towards a place where it is better than where it was earlier. And hope is very much in the air.
The truth is, the country isn't going in the direction that Imran promised for it. In fact, the press have taken to calling him Mr. U-turn. He said, "I will be ashamed to go abroad and ask for money." Well, the truth is, that is precisely what he has been doing.
Well, but by the time the government came in, it was a well-known fact that Pakistan needs some kind of a bailout, and I'm not saying that today. I said this repeatedly in interviews to print, even in international media before going into the elections. And it is not something to be proud of. So if he says I'm ashamed of it, you have to have pretty low self-respect to go around doing what the Prime Minister of Pakistan, the Finance Minister of Pakistan have to do in the current circumstances and be proud of that fact. The real challenge is the real decision, and that's how we will be judged in the future. Did we take the decisions of setting the country's economy on a path where this is going to be, what I've repeatedly said, the last IMF program if we get into one right now? And for that, a very, very clear direction has been set. Pakistan has been using a growth strategy which is imported capital finance, consumption-led. That has led us repeatedly into these current account deficit cycles. It's taken our external indebtedness to a level which is not sustainable until we move Pakistan to a domestic resource mobilized, productivity-led, export-oriented economy. We're not going to be getting out of this begging bowl syndrome. And in the very first 100 days, we have taken clear decisions which are moving the country in that direction.
Very interesting you say that, Minister, but if one cuts through the economic jargon, it seems to me that what you have done is sort out loans from those who are going to impose the least conditions upon those loans. You looked at the IMF at the very beginning. You wanted a big wodge of money from them. Some people said up to $12 billion. Then you realized there were going to be very, very serious conditions imposed upon it, so you cut the bid to $6 billion, and you haven't even agreed that. And instead, you've raced over to the Chinese and the Saudis and taken their money because they don't impose the same rigorous conditions. So you can't convince me that this is a new start for Pakistan.
There are actually two different parts to that thing. First of all, the sequence of actions is not exactly consistent with what you just said. When I became finance minister, I said we will be reaching out to friendly bilateral countries as well as starting a dialogue with IMF, and we are going to do these things simultaneously because there is no time to first work out a strategy which is your preferred option. And that's exactly what we did. We within 10 days of becoming the finance minister, I reached out to IMF, invited their team over, and that team did come in. A staff mission came in. They issued a report. We started a formal dialogue. The mission was here in the month of November, and that dialogue continues even today.
That's all very well, Minister, but that's all very well, and I understand these things aren't altogether simple, but the bottom line is the IMF ties giving you up to $6 or $7 billion US dollars. It ties it to some very serious reforms that you must make to stop living beyond your means, including hiking energy prices, for example. You don't want to do that. That's politically difficult, which seems to me why you're so tempted to take the money from Saudi Arabia, for example, where they're not imposing those kinds of conditions.
If you allowed me to complete my answer, you would have gotten the response to this part as well. That's what I said. There is a second part of it. And that is, we have not waited for IMF to impose any sanctions on us or impose any conditions on us to do what we think is required for the economy. In the very first 100 days, we have increased gas prices, we've increased electricity prices, we put in a supplementary finance budget where we increased taxes. We have been, the policy rate has been increased by the central bank, the rupee has been devalued, the currency has been adjusted by the central bank. So both the monetary policy and the fiscal policy have been moving in the very direction of the reforms that are needed. We don't need IMF to dictate that to us for us to do that, because we believe this is what's necessary. However, the path for reform is different in the eyes of the IMF as we stand today versus what we think is right. And that's what the dialogue is going on right now. There is no difference of opinion in terms of what needs to be done. It is the pace, the sequence and the extent which is being discussed.
Well, the pace and the extent, they're pretty important differences, I would suggest. But you keep avoiding the references I keep making to your decision to take Saudi money, when everybody else around the world was utterly appalled and disgusted by what we saw happen in the Saudi consulate in Istanbul with the murder of the Saudi writer and journalist Jamal Khashoggi. The Pakistani government held its nose, decided to send top representation to that investment forum in Riyadh, and your Prime Minister Imran Khan himself went out of his way to say nice things about the Saudis, and as a result you got an assistance package of around $6 billion. When we talk about shame, should you not be ashamed for that?
Well, I would be happy to be ashamed of standing up with a country with whom I've had close bilateral relations, and both countries which have supported each other over years. And I've never lectured on what kind of a system that country should hold. Maybe the Western leaders should be ashamed of themselves talking about democracy, talking about freedoms, and then reaching out into the same Saudi pockets to take out billions of dollars of business deals. The leader of the Western world, the leader of the free world, Mr. Donald Trump, stands up and openly says, I'm getting too much business from Saudi Arabia for me to worry about what happened to Khashoggi. So maybe some of the Western leaders should be ashamed of themselves. We are just being consistent in a bilateral relationship which has remained the same regardless of who is in power.
Finance Minister, I take your point about Donald Trump. If he was sitting in the hard talk chair today, believe me, I'd be discussing with him his values, the way he treats his relationship with Saudi Arabia. As it happens, I've got you in the chair. I come back to the point. You've taken, in the last month or two, $6 billion of assistance from Riyadh. That gives the Saudis real leverage over you. As I understand it, one of the conditions is that you send some of your military personnel to work in Saudi Arabia. You say that they won't be fighting in Yemen, but they'll certainly be training the forces that do fight in Yemen. Is that a price that you, in all honesty, think is worth paying to just get yet more bailout money?
The Pakistani relationship with Saudi Arabia goes back half a century. This is very interesting, Stephen. When I was born that day, my father, who was working in the Pakistan Army at that point in time, was in Saudi Arabia, and he had a meeting with the Crown Prince, who later became King Faisal, who gifted me a small Quran. So this is a relationship which goes back 50 years. It has got nothing to do with Khashoggi. It's got nothing to do with Yemen. Pakistani troops have been present in Saudi Arabia, and we've had a military relationship which spans half a century. And that relationship is not about to break because we may agree or disagree with Saudi Arabia on how to handle the Yemen crisis.
Thing is, if we move beyond Saudi Arabia to your relationship with China, I see yet more seeds of trouble being sown by your desperation to get your hands on foreign currency to save your parlous budget. The Chinese relationship involves a huge investment from China in this CPEC, the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. Much of the money going into vast infrastructure projects in Balochistan. We know that many people in that very underdeveloped part of your country are furious about the impact the Chinese money and the Chinese labor is having on their particular region. Again, are you sure that all of the compromises you're making to get your hands on the cash are worth it?
I'm not sure which compromise you're referring to, but Stephen, I thought foreign direct investment was something which was good. That's what I learned from Western economic schools. That's the economics that I was taught.
It all depends.
FDI is good and it should be sought.
Minister, it all depends whose interest it's in, who's got the leverage, whose interest is it really serving.
What is supposed to be a good deal is where the interest of both the investor and the country in which the investment is taking place is served. both their interests are served, and that's exactly what is going on in CPEC. As far as vast number of people in Balochistan being furious at what the Chinese are doing there, on our last visit to China, when I went there with the Prime Minister, the Chief Minister of Balochistan, who is the elected Chief Minister of Balochistan, who represents the voice of the people of Balochistan, was with us, and he was eager to have the Chinese engagement in Balochistan increase versus what it is right now. So I'm not sure which are these people who are furious over Chinese engagement in Balochistan.
Why does your government not go public with all of the arrangements, the financial details behind China's loans and indeed investments in Pakistan, including rates of interest, labour terms and conditions, all of those things? Many people in Pakistan have asked you to be completely transparent about the nature of the deals you strike with the Chinese, and the Pakistani government has always refused.
That's actually not true. If I divide it into two different parts, most of the investments which have come in have been in what are called the independent power projects, the IPPs which came in. And those are investments which are made under a transparent, announced policy which the regulator puts into place. So those terms and conditions, you can go on the website right now and find out what the terms and conditions for those investments are. As far as the loans are concerned, the loans information, there was a lot of mistrust, probably built around the media narrative which has been going around. When the IMF team came in, we shared all the details with them as transparently as they wanted. After the first meeting, I didn't hear any questions from them because there is nothing to hide.
Did you see the words not so long ago of Mike Pompeo, the US Secretary of State, when he was asked about his view and America's view of the IMF helping Pakistan in the future? He said, make no mistake, we're going to watch what the IMF does very closely. There is no rationale for IMF dollars associated with that American dollars being used to bail out Chinese bondholders or China itself.
We'll worry about our China debt problem. Mr. Pompeo should worry about his China debt problem. The USA is the largest debtor in the world to China. $1.3 trillion they owe. What does Pakistan owe to China? Less than 10% of Pakistan's foreign debt is owned by the Chinese right now. 90% is non-Chinese. We have been into 12 different IMF programs in the last 30 years. Why has this question never been asked about which source or which country has lent how much to Pakistan? Why is this suddenly all this much interest in how much money has come from China? Why were the same questions not being asked when the lenders were Western banks?
You tell me that the Baluchi people are thrilled that China's putting so much money and infrastructure into their region. It's a little embarrassing, isn't it, when, as quite recently in the port city Gwadar there, that you're trying to develop as a sort of new megaport to be at the end of this sort of Chinese transportation infrastructure through the region. It's a little embarrassing. At the time you were taking delegates, I believe, from more than 20 countries to look at the potential of all of these projects. Gunmen shot dead 3 workers, injured 5 others, and that was the 4th fatal shooting in the area in just a few short months. The security situation and the degree of insecurity around that region and the anger that I've referred to that is generated among some by what is happening, that's a real threat to stability in Balochistan.
This is not anger of the people of Balochistan. These are activities of sponsored terrorists who receive training, funding, material from outside Pakistan. And is there a serious attempt to try and destabilize Balochistan and through that try and subvert CPEC? Of course there is. There is a concerted effort to do that.
Who's doing that?
So there is no disagreement there.
Who's doing that in your opinion? Who is doing that? These external forces?
Led by India, of course. So is there terrorist intervention in Balochistan? Absolutely yes. What the people of Balochistan thought, there has been expressed through the free will of those people by electing a government of Balochistan which stands by CPEC, which wants greater engagement of CPEC in their province.
Let's talk about the big picture in Pakistan. Imran Khan came to power, you became finance minister, promising a new era of fairness in your country, where every individual Pakistani would get a fair shake. The situation today is that 45% of children under the age of 5 show signs of undernourishment and stunted growth. You have some of the worst education figures in all of South Asia. And at the very same time, only 800,000 Pakistanis out of a population of more than 200 million pay any significant tax. If you are to change that situation, it is going to require the most massive, thoroughgoing reform.
Those are the very reforms that we have been working on despite the severe balance of payment crisis. The revenue generation aspect is absolutely central to be able to deal with the horrendous challenges that we have. You're absolutely right about that. The health situation, the education situation needs drastic reform. For that you need revenue. For that you need the revenue authority fix. So what are some of the things that we have already done? We have separated tax policy from tax administration, which is absolutely central to the reform effort. Almost the entire top leadership of that revenue authority has been changed. We have made changes in law which allow the application of modern technology, use of data analytics, algorithms, to figure out where tax evasion is taking place, who is evading taxes, to be able to go after them. We have developed these lists of high net worth individuals who are evading taxes. 3,100 of them have already been issued notices, and the follow-up is being done. The database is more than 700,000. But we wanted to first pick on the big ones, make them an example, and then expand the net. And I can go on with 10 other initiatives which have been taken as a result of this.
It's interesting you alight upon tax evasion, and of course that's one element of an accountable, transparent system of governance. Another way of looking at that is looking at the state of the media and the right to free expression. Imran Khan and your government are accused by the Committee to Protect Journalists in a statement released recently of aiding and abetting a situation in your country where the Pakistani army has, quote, quietly but effectively set restrictions on reporting, lines of control which effectively gag the media. In the interests of open and transparent governance, you personally must be fighting that, are you?
The need for Pakistani democracy is a media which is free to express its opinion and get the facts to the people of Pakistan. We as Democrats have a vested interest in a free media.
You don't have a free media. You have journalists who are being disappeared by shadowy intelligence agencies. You have an opposition party leader who is saying our country is today under the grip of a silent martial law.
That's very nice and dandy for the opposition leader to say that. But if in the last 3.5 months you can mention the name of a single journalist who has disappeared or come under any kind of a threat, I'd be happy to know, because I would like to stand up for that journalist. The need for free media is absolutely paramount. The government of Imran Khan, the Tehreek-e-Insaf government, stands by that responsibility. There is a need for bringing some kind of accountability into this whole space of media and social media so that people cannot spread false information, but that cannot be made an excuse for gagging people's expression of the right of freedom of expression. All you have to do, Stephen, is watch one evening of television and you'll find out how free the media is, how the government gets ripped into and criticized.
On that point, I just recommend you talk to the veteran and respected journalist Ghazi Salahuddin, who said recently he's lived through the dictatorship of General Zia, but he says right now is one of the worst times I've ever seen for journalists. We get threatening phone calls, we've seen journalists being disappeared, we see an atmosphere of fear and self-censorship. So if you want to know what's happening in the Pakistani media today, maybe you should speak to him.
I will be happy to speak to him and know him very well. I have a lot of respect for him, but with due respect to Ghazi Salahuddin, then he's forgotten what happened in Zia era. Journalists were in jail, they were tortured, there were public flogging of journalists. So with all due respect, maybe he's starting to, his memory is starting to fade and he doesn't remember what was going on there. But that should be no benchmark. We should not be saying that we are better than. I stand for freedom of media as much as Ghazi Salahuddin does, and I'll be happy to make that phone call to him.
And if you stand for a free, well-governed Pakistan, very different from what we've seen in the past, where extremism doesn't triumph, how worried are you that Imran Khan has completely failed to stand up for the rights of Asia Bibi since she was released from prison. Of course, the Supreme Court said that she should be released after she'd languished in prison for so many years in a blasphemy case, which the court ultimately dismissed, and yet she has not been allowed to leave the country. How disgusted are you, as a minister in the government, by your own government's failure to protect her rights?
Imran Khan's government believes in rule of law and the supremacy of the law. We believe in a tricameral system of justice. The courts decided what was the right decision. It is not for the government to decide, and the government stood by that decision. Putting any kind of a blame on the government on either the release of Asia Bibi or her lack of travel abroad, neither of these decisions were taken by the government of Pakistan, so you can neither give us any credit nor any discredit for that. We believe that these are decisions for the courts to take, and whatever the decision that is taken...
I'm not doling out the credit or the discredits. I'm listening to human rights activists like Sherry Rehman, who said Asia Bibi is still suffering profoundly despite her acquittal. Imran Khan has lost all credibility. He cannot make decisions to uphold the rule of law. His politics revolves around religion and U-turns. Things really haven't changed very much at all, have they?
Maybe Sherry Rehman has not heard about the fact that those who created a law and order situation after that, after that decision was taken, who destroyed public property, who issued threatening statements, are facing accountability perhaps for the first time in decades in Pakistan. Maybe this change has not yet been informed to Ms. Sherry Rehman. I would strongly suggest that she should go through the newspapers of the last few weeks, and she'll find out what is happening is truly unprecedented in the last 30 years of Pakistan.
Let's end with a personal note, if we may, Minister. You know that there are countries in the West that have offered safe haven to Asia Bibi. Would you, as a human being, and never mind your loyalty to the government, whatever, but just on a most human and personal level,